CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. A bailout for hospitality in the UK as the Omicron variant triggers a Christmas business collapse. But many in the industry say it's not enough.
Our other headlines: Germany considers closing nightclubs and bars after their scientists warn the variant could bring services to breaking point.
And President Putin says he'll deploy the Russian military to counter NATO threats. But Ukraine says its future lies in alliance to the West. The UK's finance minister has announced a $1.3 billion bailout package to help the hospitality sector hit hard by cancellations over Christmas. Many businesses are losing trade due to a surge in COVID cases. On Monday, more than 91,000 new COVID cases were recorded in the UK. That's the second highest daily total on record. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Naweed Jabarkil in London. Naweed, Chancellor Rishi Sunak was under pressure to come up with some kind of buffer for hospitality. How far does this go?
Well, the finance minister here says that this is a comprehensive set of measures, three main strands to it. First of all, the major part of it is $1.3 billion of cash grants to around 200,000 businesses in the hospitality and leisure sector. But those businesses will be able to use that one-time offer of about $8,000 each. Now, although that's going to help a lot of businesses, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, for the bigger businesses, it's simply not going to be enough. That's significantly less than what they may be losing out each and every day as the coronavirus pandemic continues to hit businesses. Hospitality UK, which represents the sector, says some businesses have seen trade fall this month by about 40 to 60%. And this is a crucial period of business for the industry, the festive period, that's Christmas and New Year. Usually Christmas parties are a big part of life here in the UK, and people tend to do them in establishments like pubs and restaurants. All of that's pretty much boiled off because the government has told people to work from home where they can and told them to limit their socialisation as well, and particularly mixing with other households. Aside from that, the other part of these measures includes a £30 million injection for the Cultural Recovery Fund. That's theatres and museums who are also being impacted by this, particularly with lower numbers of audience figures. That £30 million, that's about $40 million to be funnelled to culture businesses in the UK. And then lastly, there's also going to be help with sick pay. So if staff at businesses have to isolate because of the pandemic or because of coming into contact with someone who has COVID-19, then the government says they're going to try and help businesses cover the costs of that sick pay. And again, that's going to be very, very important for small and medium-sized enterprises. But just some response to this, the reaction: British Chamber of Commerce says it's welcome news, but that, quote, a wider support package is necessary. And then there are some sectors who've been left out completely, like the travel and tourism sector, who have been hit by the latest changes, the reintroduction of testing requirements, for example, and they say that they've been overlooked yet again, and that's another key sector that's been battered by the pandemic.
Naweed, I wonder if you're sensing that this is a prelude to some bigger news, because we're hearing Prime Minister Boris Johnson will make a further announcement on tightening of restrictions in coming days.
Yeah, and it's not just Boris Johnson. If you look at what officials have been saying in recent days, we've had Sajid Javid over the weekend, Dominic Raab as well, the Deputy Prime Minister. Javid is the Health Secretary, and they've really been saying that they won't hesitate to take stronger action if necessary. So they've been laying the groundwork, if you like, to try and prepare people for the possibility that stronger measures will be brought in. In the last few moments, we've been hearing from the Sun newspaper that the Prime Minister Boris Johnson will make an announcement in the next 48 hours, it says, according to its sources, on whether or not he'll bring in a circuit breaker. That's essentially a lighter lockdown. What The Sun claims Mr. Johnson may be considering is moving the country back to step 2 restrictions. That'll apply to England only, because the other 3 countries that make up the United Kingdom chart their own course on the coronavirus. And we've heard from Scotland today as well. It's telling people to cancel their celebrations for the New Year period. It's going to tighten restrictions there north of the border from Boxing Day. So I think realistically now the government is trying to, the UK government that is going to try and resist any major changes before Christmas, given what's happened last year. But the writing and all the indications seem that there may be tougher measures to come.
As COVID-19 infection rates continue to rise in the UK, pressures mounting on the government to take further measures to try and stop its spread, something that's not being ruled out by officials.
We agreed that we should keep the data from now on under constant review, keep following it hour by hour, and unfortunately I must say to people we will have to reserve the possibility of taking further action to protect the public and to protect public health, to protect our NHS. And we won't hesitate to take that action.
In terms of cases, the UK is the worst affected country in Europe right now. But Omicron's spread is affecting much of the continent.
There is now consistent evidence that Omicron is spreading significantly faster than the Delta variant. And it's more likely that people who have been vaccinated or have recovered from COVID-19 could be infected or reinfected.
With Christmas just days away, the WHO has urged people to avoid big get-togethers. But in the UK, officials could be reluctant to dictate any changes. Last year, a late U-turn saw many people unable to spend the day with their families, and any similar move could be politically damaging for a Prime Minister who's been mired in controversy lately. London's mayor has already said the city is cancelling its New Year's Eve celebrations for yet another year. But as the disruption continues, so too does the economic damage for businesses. The hospitality industry in the UK had been calling for clearer guidance from the government as trade dries up at one of the busiest times of year.
Firstly, we're announcing £1 billion in financial grant support, which means eligible hospitality companies will be able to claim a cash grant worth up to £6,000.
The financial help announced on Tuesday is a sign of the growing uncertainty that's hitting British businesses and consumers. And with Omicron spreading at pace, all the signs indicate that even tougher restrictions could be on the way.
And in the last few minutes, about 4 minutes ago, the UK Health Security Agency, which is charting the pandemic, says that a further 90,629 new cases have been recorded in the past 24 hours and another 172 deaths. So again, it's above 90,000, near those record highs, and I think that's going to drive a lot of the government's thinking here if what Mr Johnson says is what's going to happen. He says that hospitalisations and deaths and the new infections will be pushing forward their thinking. So I think if these case numbers continue to be where they are, near record high infection rates, then tougher measures could be just around the corner.
Louisa Barkill in London, thank you.
Well, as the Omicron COVID variant spreads around the world, governments are once again tightening travel restrictions. Airlines, hotels and many other businesses will struggle with losing trade during the usually busy Christmas season. Paul Charles is the CEO at the travel PR firm, the PC Agency.
The problem is that the industry is going backwards again, understandably, as governments put in place restrictions that we thought we'd moved on from. So, yes, you're seeing an industry that is very much in limbo at the moment as more countries put in place worsening restrictions as far as the travel and tourism sector is concerned. This is a sector that employs traditionally 1 in 10 people in most economies. And as you can imagine, many tens of thousands of jobs were lost during the first stage of the pandemic, and now as we move towards an epidemic, it looks as though things are getting worse again. So it's not a pretty picture at all for the sector.
You must sympathise with governments. I mean, surely changing travel regulations in response to Omicron, a rampant virus, surely makes sense, doesn't it?
Well, it makes sense to put in place the right restrictions, and those are more individually based measures rather than blanket measures. One of the problems is governments are being ultra cautious because they don't know how Omicron is going to spread yet. They don't know its severity, but they've put in place the most severe of restrictions, blanket measures. And blanket measures don't work. They don't stop, as we've seen in Australia and New Zealand and other countries, infections actually coming in. What they should be doing is putting in place more testing-only based measures rather than quarantine measures, which simply put off people from travelling. And that's the mistake that governments are making. They're resorting to the policies they first put in place early on in the pandemic. But we need to move on and learn to live with COVID now, because there will be future variants, not just this one.
You may have heard us reporting on the UK Finance Minister announcing a $1.3 billion bailout to help the hospitality sector. What support do you want to see, and how would it work?
Well, some of the smaller businesses in the travel and tourism sector actually may be eligible for some of that funding that the Chancellor has announced, depending on how their businesses operate. We're still waiting for the full details. But in essence, the government should be supporting along the lines of the furlough scheme, which they, of course, introduced in the UK and other countries, especially in Europe, earlier on in the pandemic. At the moment, travel and tourism businesses are in limbo, because the government is effectively saying to people to be cautious. Well, that's putting off people, but the government is not asking for a full closure or a lockdown, and therefore extra funding is not kicking in. What they need to be doing is choosing not a halfway house, but a position either way. They either say you need to close and people can't travel, or they need to be saying you can travel just with precautions and take it easy. But at the moment, this limbo, this halfway house, means people aren't choosing to book at the moment, and that, of course, means there's no cash coming into businesses. So the government really needs to put in place a furlough scheme if they're serious about restrictions being in place.
Germany is considering closing nightclubs and bars after experts warned that the Omicron variant could bring critical infrastructure to breaking point there. Private gatherings are expected to be limited, with the rules applying to everyone, including fully vaccinated people. The German government has been meeting for a number of hours now to debate the new proposed measures. Let's talk to our correspondent Trent Murray in Berlin. Trent, just how likely is it that more restrictions are on this way? Any news from this meeting?
Well, I think the fact that this meeting is now starting to go over time indicates that political leaders here are having some difficulty over introducing restrictions, but I think it is clear some form of restrictions will be announced in coming hours. It's just really a question of how far they will go. We understand that the circular that has been given to the regional leaders does include things like club closures and limiting New Year's Eve parties, but it doesn't go much further than that. Where things have got a little bit complicated is that the Public Health Agency here, the Robert Koch Institute, released a bit of a wish list today publicly of what it would like to see, and they went much further. They included things like extending the school holidays to keep children out of schools, closing restaurants, even a nighttime curfew. Now, we're hearing in the past hour or so reporting from the Bild newspaper that has really quite upset Chancellor Olaf Scholz as well as the Health Minister, that the RKI went public with that, and they are now pushing back politically against that move. So I think now what you're probably seeing is that this meeting could go into the evening as the political leaders, I suppose, debate and discuss with some of the scientists whether those strict measures are needed, and more so whether the population as a whole kind of can stomach such drastic moves this close to Christmas. It always was going to be complicated introducing restrictions to a country which, the majority of which has been vaccinated. It seems, based on how long this meeting is going, that indeed those political leaders are having some difficulty getting to grips with the decision.
Trent, we reported on a number of protests over the last week or so, people very unhappy, demonstrating about continued restrictions. How are any new rules likely to be received there?
I think when Chancellor Scholz eventually does front the cameras in coming hours to update the country on what he plans to do, I think that you will see him really try to strike a balance and a tone, asking people for patience, because there is a growing sense in parts of the community, at least, that there is some fatigue and frustration over these long-running restrictions. You know, things like mask mandates and vaccine passports have been used now pretty well for most of this year. And so if the government wants to pull more levers with more restrictions, well, they will inevitably probably upset some more people, including businesses, which, much like you've been reporting in the UK, are also facing a really difficult time here, seeing cancellations over the Christmas period. So I think it won't be a surprise to see him take that tone. There were protests overnight in 20 separate cities in Germany, around 50,000 people coming onto the streets. So, of course, this is one of the many difficulties this government faces, is not just trying to protect the healthcare system, but trying to bring people with them in that endeavour.
Trent Murray, our correspondent in Berlin, thank you very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, China's live streaming queen vanishes from online platforms after she was fined $200 million for tax evasion.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. A quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
The UK Foreign Minister Liz Truss was in Brussels today for a new round of Brexit talks. Her visit comes after Lord Frost quit his role of Brexit chief, citing policy differences with Prime Minister Boris Johnson's administration. The EU hoped Truss's visit could be a reset moment, but she's already said the UK's position remains unchanged. Let's talk to our correspondent Benji Hire, watching events for us in Brussels. Benji, there was hope for a new beginning, a new negotiator. Has that all survived the meeting in Brussels?
Well, if we're going by Liz Truss's statement that's come out in the past few hours, then same old, really. The fact is that she has maintained the UK's position. She said that that the UK is going to continue its strong stance when it comes to these negotiations over Northern Ireland. and even echoed the sentiment of her predecessor David Frost by saying that they would consider ripping up part of that Brexit deal that was agreed pretty much a year ago. It's been a turbulent time if you're Boris Johnson deciding who's going to be your Brexit secretary or chief negotiator. There's been 7 people in the role so far. And Liz Truss is only the most recent, in addition to her existing roles as Foreign Secretary and Women's Minister too. If you look at her past, it's confusing to know exactly which particular stance she might take when it comes to Brexit talks, given the fact she did originally campaign to remain within the European Union. However, given that she was going around the world signing free trade deals in her capacity as International Trade Secretary at the time, she seems to have burnished some of those Brexit credentials, which has earned her a significant amount of popularity amongst fellow Conservative MPs. But those will be the very people calling for her to continue that strong stance against the EU in negotiations that will continue on into the new year. And as much as they are hailing her achievements for signing trade agreements with nations around the world, the particular challenge she faces now to try to navigate the complexities around the Northern Ireland Protocol may be really testing the credentials that she managed to get when she was in that previous role as International Trade Secretary.
So what does all of this mean for UK-EU relationships over the coming months?
That's the tricky question, because ultimately we're back to a stage where there's still no particular agreement when it comes to this Northern Ireland Protocol. To remind people watching, this is the system that was in place as part of that Brexit deal to ensure that goods can goods can flow freely between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. There's no hard border there, but what that does is add customs checks between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, something the UK sees as totally unsustainable, which is why there are threats to trigger, I should say, Article 16 and rip up that agreement. The EU's pretty firm on this. They say that they want some predictability and some stability, but there has been some room for manoeuvre. In the past couple of months, they've signalled that they will reduce those checks between Great Britain and Northern Ireland by about half. So there is potential here, and what we're seeing in terms of the statements that have come out from today's meeting is that there is a consensus from both sides to try to come to some sort of agreement and move on here and bring an end to a saga that's been going on for many years now.
Benji Hire, our correspondent in Brussels, thank you very much.
The world's largest mobile network operator, China Mobile, hopes to raise $8.8 billion when it lists on the Shanghai Stock Exchange. The listing comes after the company was forced to quit Wall Street in January due to rules imposed by former President Donald Trump. In papers filed to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, where it also trades, the telecom giant said it planned to issue around 8 to 9 million shares for around $9 each.
Turkey's President Erdogan has shocked stock markets by promising to compensate savers adversely affected by the depreciation of the lira. His controversial policy on interest rates has seen inflation soar above 20%. But his government announced it will use taxpayers' money to offset losses suffered by investors during the currency crash. Economists have described it as an indirect way of hiking interest rates and raised concerns over how it will be paid for.
Procter & Gamble is recalling more than 30 aerosol hair care products after finding traces of the chemical benzene, which can cause leukemia and other life-threatening blood disorders. Well-known brands, including Pantene and Herbal Essences, are among the items affected. The company said the move was precautionary and that there have been no reports of any adverse effects.
Aircraft makers Boeing and Airbus have called on Washington to delay the widespread rollout of 5G networks. The companies say they're concerned the mobile phone signals could interfere with the electronic systems of aircraft. It's not the first time the aviation industry has raised concern about 5G, with the Federal Aviation Authority voicing concern 5G could cause flight delays and diversions.
US President Joe Biden is due to announce the purchase of 500 million home testing kits for COVID-19. It comes as United States officials confirm that Omicron is now the dominant variant in the country, accounting for 3/4 of all new infections. Let's talk to our correspondent Sarah Walton, who's in New York. Sarah, what is President Biden expected to say?
Well, as you say, the major announcement we're expecting when he speaks to the country in a few hours' time is that 500 million rapid tests are going to be given out to the public for free. They should be available in the January time, and there's going to be a website set up where people can apply to get hold of those. Now, this is a big change because free at-home tests are not widely available in the US, unlike we see in some countries in Europe, for example. It's not entirely clear where all these tests are going to come from, though. It is being reported that Joe Biden may invoke the Defense Production Act to get them made. That is essentially a legal ruling that allows the president to force manufacturers to start making items of need during a crisis. We are also expecting Biden to say that the federal government will be setting up new testing sites, coronavirus testing sites across the country. The first ones we think are going to be in New York and could be up and running before Christmas, so opening their doors in just a few days' time. Also, we think Joe Biden will say that the country will be that he's preparing 1,000 medical professionals to go and help out in hospitals that are becoming overcrowded, and also that hundreds more people will be dispatched to help deliver coronavirus vaccines. Now, what we aren't expecting the president to talk about is anything to do with bringing in health restrictions again, or even a lockdown. There's been a lot of speculation over that, but the White House going to great lengths to shut down any suggestion that that is where the country is headed. It is a bit of a shift in focus, though, because really, since Joe Biden became president, the White House has been very much focused on the vaccine rollout. These new measures suggest a bit of a shift to focus on stopping the virus spreading in the first place.
It does seem very much like a shift in focus, and the pace of these changes that you're mentioning seem to have really picked up over the last couple of days. So how much of a concern is there about Omicron?
I think the concern is growing every day. It's only been about 3 weeks since the first case was diagnosed in the US, but as you were saying a moment ago, it is now the dominant variant. It made up 73% of new cases last week, but in some parts of the US, that figure is as high as 90%. Here in New York, just to give you a snapshot, the daily case count more than doubled last week. It's now around 7,200 new cases being reported every day. Now, so far, all the Omicron cases reported in New York have been mild, but the real concern is that it's going to put further pressure on an already very busy healthcare system. Hospitals that are still dealing with the more serious Delta infections, while they're also having to cope with the usual winter pressures that we see each year. There are also personal concerns here. You know, we're just days away from Christmas. It's a huge travel weekend. Lots of people had plans to go see friends and family. So at the moment, right through New York, you can see on nearly every street long lines of people waiting in the freezing cold, sometimes for hours, to get a COVID test to find out if it's safe for them to go through with their holiday plans. So I think every day that goes by, people are becoming more and more concerned about just what this is going to mean.
Sarah Walton in New York, thank you for the update.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, nearly 500,000 people facing homelessness this Christmas in the Philippines after Typhoon Rai left a trail of devastation.
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the second year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Juliet Mann. Our top stories: a bailout for hospitality in the UK as the Omicron COVID variant triggers a Christmas business collapse. But many in the industry say it's not enough.
Germany considers closing nightclubs and bars after scientists warn the variant could bring services to breaking point.
And President Putin says he'll deploy the Russian military to counter NATO threats, but Ukraine says its future lies in alliance to the West.
The UK Premier League has voted to continue with its fixtures over Christmas, despite over 90,000 people testing positive for COVID across the UK. In contrast, the devolved government of Wales has banned all spectators from attending events, and in Scotland, a maximum of only 500 people will be allowed to watch live sport. It's a big blow to the industry at a time of year when a number of important fixtures are scheduled. Let's talk to sports journalist Paul Scott. Good to see you, Paul. Now, let's talk about the fans first, because across Europe, most top-level sports leagues pause for the Christmas period, but not in the UK. So how big an impact will this disruption have on Wales and Scotland?
Yeah, not in the UK, and not only that, the Christmas fixtures, particularly the Boxing Day fixtures, the New Year's Day fixtures, are a huge part of the, particularly the footballing tradition in the UK. As you mentioned, the Welsh Government have decided that all sporting fixtures will have no spectators as of Boxing Day, so that's going to have a huge impact on English Football League clubs like Cardiff and Swansea. And also rugby union as well. That's a hugely popular sport. Lots of fixtures scheduled to take place over the Christmas period. And the Welsh Grand National is going to be hugely affected. That's meant to be at Chepstow on December the 27th. So it's a huge blow for Welsh sporting fans. The Scottish Government have decided to take a slightly different approach. They are allowing up to 500 spectators in the venues, both outside venues and indoors as well. And I think the theory behind that is that if you allow some people through, it will help the smaller clubs, the lower league clubs. Obviously, 500 people, it's small fry for the likes of Rangers and Celtic, but it could be hugely important the lower down the footballing pyramid you get. So I think it's a big blow. And of course, in England at the moment, we have no restrictions whatsoever, and the fixture is scheduled to go ahead on Boxing Day as planned with full capacity crowds.
I'm hoping you can clear something up for us, because there is still a lot of confusion about restrictions and measures that are in place at stadiums up and down the country, and also what is being potentially considered.
It's impossible to know, isn't it? I think with the Westminster government at the moment, that the devolved governments of Wales and Scotland have taken the lead here in the absence of any form of guidance or leadership from Westminster. That's how it seems. We saw the Premier League meeting, as you mentioned, on Monday to discuss the way forward, and they decided that the show must go on. We saw at the weekend a huge number of fixtures in the Premier League and the English Football League postponed because of positive COVID cases. Those fixtures will have to be played somewhere. They'll have to be crowbarred into the calendar by the end of the season. But quite simply, there isn't enough time in the calendar for a 2-week or a 3-week fire break or circuit breaker to be implemented, particularly in English football, because as I mentioned, the Christmas period is one of the busiest periods. So there'll be an awful lot of fixtures that will have to be made up. So the Premier League decided that the show must go on in the absence of any form of guidance from Westminster whatsoever. But as we've seen in the last 24 hours, the Welsh government has taken the lead. In the last few hours, the Scottish devolved government has taken a decision as well. And I think it's probably only a matter of time before there is some similar announcement made by the Westminster government. I don't think there'll be a break in sport. I do think that it will be limiting the amount of spectators that will be allowed at certain sporting venues.
OK, so we've talked about the fans, we've talked about logistics. Let's talk about the money, because if matches end up being played behind closed doors with no spectators or fewer spectators, there's still presumably the TV money. But what's it going to mean for sports finances?
Well, we're going to be in the same position or a similar position to where we were 18 months ago, really, with the initial lockdown. The Premier League and the Premier League clubs will be OK. As you say, they make the bulk of their money through TV deals. And in fact, the TV deal was renewed over the summer. It rolled over, so that's secured for 3 more years. And in recent weeks, they've actually struck a huge deal with NBC in the US, the biggest ever overseas deal. So the Premier League as an entity and the Premier League clubs, they will be protected from a 2-week, 3-week, even 2-month circuit breaker. It is lower down the footballing pyramid and the lower down the ranks that these issues start to be felt more acutely, which is why I think that the Scottish government has perhaps compromised with its decision to allow 500 people in outside venues, because if that were to happen down the lower leagues, in England, for example, it would give clubs in League One and League Two and in the English Football League a little something just to keep them going, because they rely heavily on revenue generated on match day. So if that dries up completely, they have very, very little coming through.
Paul Scott, sports journalist, thank you very much. And of course, another conversation for another day is whether or not the Olympics will still go ahead, the Winter Olympics. Paul Scott, thank you.
President Putin says he's ready to deploy the Russian military to counter any threats from NATO. The presidents of Russia and Ukraine have both been speaking in the last few hours as tens of thousands of Russian troops are amassed at the Ukraine border. Putin says the West is to blame for the current tension, but Vladimir Zelensky wants a timetable for Kiev's NATO membership, something Russia says would constitute a threat. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. Stuart, Putin's remarks first. Tell us more about what he said.
Yes, well, President Putin insisted again today that he is not offering an ultimatum to the West, but earlier today at a meeting of defence ministers and defence chiefs, he said this, that if a clearly aggressive policy is continued by Washington and its colleagues, Russia will take adequate military technical measures and respond toughly to unfriendly steps. We don't know what military technical measures means, but we know that unfriendly steps refers to what Russia perceives as NATO expansionism in the east of Europe. The idea that more and more countries are joining NATO and therefore NATO is getting closer to Russia's western border. Particularly, Russia is concerned about Ukraine being joined, Ukraine joining the NATO alliance, and also that NATO member countries like the United States may deploy weapons or troops in Ukraine, even though it's not a member. President Vladimir Putin says that the recent escalation in the situation between Ukraine and Russia is squarely due to NATO and the West's activities.
What's happening now, tensions that are building up in Europe, is the fault of the US and NATO. Every step of the way, Russia was forced to respond. The situation kept worsening and worsening, deteriorating and deteriorating at every step. And here we are today, in a situation where we're forced to resolve it somehow. We can't allow the situation that I've mentioned, NATO's further expansion eastward.
In response to all of that, Russia says it has the right to take measures to ensure its sovereignty and its security, and he passed that on to French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in a series of telephone conversations earlier today.
Stuart, tensions are already high. What will Ukraine's president have to say about the EU and NATO membership? How will his words now go down?
Yeah, well, for NATO, what President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine is saying, that he wants to join NATO, that's not a problem on the face of it for NATO, because NATO has wanted, or at least offered, membership to Ukraine since as long ago as 2008. It's not yet a member because NATO says it needs to clean up its government first, sort out the way it's run, get guarantees about exactly how Ukraine will contribute. But Volodymyr Zelensky would like that process to be sped up, especially with the latest situation with so many Russian troops at Ukraine's border. But NATO says that it is always up to the allied states and Ukraine as to whether it is allowed to join. It's not up to Russia, for example, to veto its membership. And Putin's reaction, Vladimir Putin's reaction to that is that Ukraine is on the doorstep of Russia. It's on the doorstep of Russia's house, and that NATO should understand Russia has nowhere to retreat if it feels vulnerable.
Stuart Smith, our correspondent in Moscow, thank you very much.
After Hong Kong's election, the region's chief executive, Carrie Lam, has travelled to Beijing to report on the administration's affairs. Lam is expected to discuss a wide range of issues, including Hong Kong's economy. CGTN's Sun Yue reports.
After talking to the press about the significance of Hong Kong's election for its future, Chief Executive Carrie Lam is in Beijing until Thursday to discuss that future and brief officials on how the region is faring. She's expected to dwell on important issues for Hong Kong's residents, including the election and Hong Kong's connection with the mainland. Hong Kong's Chief Financial Secretary Paul Chan had previously raised his forecast for the region's GDP growth to 6.5% in 2021, citing a strong recovery momentum. Experts looking at Hong Kong's economic performance say there are still things to worry about, including COVID-19.
COVID-19 has been a major uncertainty for the world. Hong Kong is no different. From food and beverage to tourism and the hospitality industry, these industries had borne the brunt of COVID-19 in Hong Kong. And their situation keeps changing by the day. That's also why both the central government has policy boosts and other plans for the mainland and Hong Kong synergy.
In the new year, with the new Legislative Council and other growth momentums, Zhang also says Hong Kong has a promising year ahead.
Hong Kong has been transitioning, and it has new growth points to look forward to. I think the most exciting development could come from Hong Kong's burgeoning metropolitan area in the north, and also in sci-tech development, as Hong Kong joins Shenzhen in scientific development in greater stride. Lastly, the Guangdong-Hong Kong-Macau Greater Bay Area is getting even better connected in facilities, so a high-quality lifestyle circle could form. And there is the momentum that comes from joining Hong Kong's professional services with the mainland's manufacturing.
China's 14th five-year plan, which will steer the country into the year 2025, has highlighted Hong Kong and Macau's integration into mainland's economic growth. The plan has also stressed the high-quality development for the Greater Bay Area, and policies including the Cross-Boundary Wealth Management Connect has since launched to ensure Hong Kong will grow with the rest of China. Sun Yue, CGTN, Beijing.
Nearly 500,000 people face homelessness this Christmas in the Philippines after Typhoon Rai left a trail of devastation. Hundreds of thousands of people are in evacuation centres or staying with relatives following the Category 5 storm, which destroyed homes and left survivors in need of food, water and shelter. Our correspondent Gretchen Malalad reports.
The death toll from Typhoon Rai keeps on climbing. Most of the deaths were in the central region of Visayas and the Caraga region and northeastern Mindanao. Humanitarian organizations are facing difficulties in distributing aid because many communities are still cut off. 5 bridges from the province of Palawan were destroyed by the typhoon. The Philippine National Red Cross says that they wanted to send urgent supplies like food, water, and medicines, but communication lines are still down and they can't travel there until the bridges have been repaired. Typhoon Rai has displaced almost 500,000 people in the region. Initial figures released for damages in agriculture showed more than 30,000 hectares of crops wiped out. That amounts to at least $7 million. Survivors are in dire need of food, water, and shelter. The government is ramping up aid efforts and has already sent Navy and Coast Guard vessels full of relief goods to distribute to affected areas. President Rodrigo Duterte himself has led the distribution of relief goods as he visited evacuation centers in Bohol and Cebu. He also talked to some survivors of the typhoon. President Duterte pledged to raise 10 billion pesos or $200 million to help survivors and rehabilitate affected provinces. There's a number of foreign governments that vowed to help typhoon victims. The first one to send aid is the Chinese government. 20,000 food packages containing rice and canned food will be distributed to families in the provinces of Cebu, Bohol, Surigao, and Cagayan de Oro. Also, around 5 million kilograms of rice are now being urgently transported to typhoon-affected areas. Other countries like Japan, the U.S., and UK have also vowed to send aid. Gretchen Malalad, CGTN, Manila.
We will not change and we will not let anyone in. The message from Hungary's leader Viktor Orban after a Budapest court ruled that his government had the right to deport refugees. The EU is withholding recovery funds from Hungary due to continued clashes over its domestic policy. Orban has, however, confirmed Hungary will order 9.5 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine from the EU.
Hundreds of people have been protesting outside Romania's parliament as lawmakers debate whether to make COVID passes mandatory in workplaces. Passes have been in place since October for restaurants, non-essential shops and cultural venues.
Thailand has reinstated rules requiring foreign visitors to quarantine. The so-called sandbox program, which allowed visitors to leave their accommodation as long as they remained nearby, has also been suspended, except on the tourist island of Phuket. It comes after the country reported its first locally transmitted case of the Omicron variant.
Hundreds of Afghans have held a demonstration in the capital, Kabul, calling for the international community to release billions of dollars in frozen assets. The rare protest, permitted by the Taliban, comes as the country battles an economic crisis and the threat of starvation for around half of the population. The funds were frozen when the Taliban came to power in August.
The biggest divorce case in UK history has ended with the ruler of Dubai being told to pay $733 million to his estranged wife. Britain's High Court said Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum must pay the money to his youngest of his 6 wives, Princess Haya bint Al Hussein, to ensure her security and that of their 2 children. She fled to the UK in 2019, saying she feared for her life. The British judge said Sheikh Mohammed posed a grave risk to her and her children.
Chinese authorities have launched a clampdown on tax payments from a growing number of online influencers. Huang Wei, widely known in China as Via, was fined $210 million for dodging tax. Our correspondent Chen Tong reports from Shanghai.
The tax bureau in eastern China's Zhejiang province, where Huang Wei's company is located, said she concealed a part of her commissions and failed to report personal income from other businesses from 2019 to 2020. Huang failed to declare $9 million in taxes and evaded taxes amounting to a whopping $100 million. Tax experts say evasion involving such huge amounts is rare.
The penalty amount is quite huge. Huang has been reporting income which should be declared as personal labor payment as income of her shell companies, which enjoy different levels of tax rates.
The huge penalty amount stems from the lucrative sales from live streaming. A report from market research firm iResearch shows China's e-commerce live streaming market hit more than $188 billion in 2020. It's said to more than quadruple to over $760 billion in 2023. In China, there are 1.23 million registered live streamers. Huang Wei is not the only high-profile live streamer who's run afoul of the law. In November, 2 other popular live streamers were also fined for tax evasion. In September this year, China's Tax Bureau published a notice reminding live streamers to self-check their tax declarations. Experts say because the live streaming market has just recently emerged, tax professionals' authorities are studying how best to apply taxation rules.
Tax compliance is not very good in the live streaming market. Tax service providers are not professional enough, which may have led to huge gaps in tax payment. But I think the government will continue to support the market by optimizing relevant taxation laws.
Huang Wei has accepted the consequences and posted a letter of apology Monday on her social media account Weibo. Since then, that and all her social media accounts with up to 120 million followers, along with her online shops, have been shut down for what authorities call regulation violation. Chen Tong, CGTN, Shanghai.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, one of the great Spanish masters gets a digital makeover 200 years after his death.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. In the United States, museums and other cultural institutions are facing pressure to distance themselves from the Sackler family. For decades, their name was associated with philanthropy.
But a scandal over a pain-killing drug that helped build the family's wealth has tarnished their reputation. Karina Huber reports.
For decades, the Sackler name was a fixture at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. The family was once one of the art world's biggest benefactors. But after facing numerous lawsuits related to the Sacklers' role in the opioid crisis, the Met is distancing itself. In 2019, the Met announced it would no longer accept gifts from the family. Now it is removing the Sackler name from 7 wings, including the one that houses the iconic Temple of Dendur built in Egypt in the 1st century BC.
A lot of museums, not only in the U.S., but also in Europe, specifically in the UK and Paris, have said they would stop taking gifts from the Sacklers, but they didn't say that they would take their name off the wall. And there have been a couple of museums that have sort of done it, but few have done it as definitively as the Met has done it.
The Sacklers made their fortune through Purdue Pharma, producer of OxyContin and other opioid painkillers, widely blamed for triggering the addiction crisis that has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. In 2020, Purdue pleaded guilty to 3 criminal charges related to its aggressive marketing of OxyContin and agreed to pay $8.3 billion in fines.
The unlawful dangerous scheme put profits over people by seeking to increase scripts for addictive EROs, even when they were not medically appropriate and at the height of the U.S. opioid crisis.
Activists, including famed photographer Nan Goldin, who overcame an addiction to OxyContin, have staged protests outside numerous museums that have received Sackler money, including the Louvre in Paris, demanding it change the name of its Sackler wing.
They flooded America with this medication and addicted millions of people.
In 2019, shortly after the protest, the Louvre became the first major museum to remove the Sackler name.
But experts say the Met is the museum most closely associated with the Sacklers, and its decision to remove the Sackler name from some of its galleries is likely to compel other cultural institutions to do the same.
Greenberger says museums are under greater pressure than ever to scrutinize their donors.
I think that patronage, like private patronage, is obviously going to be important. I mean, museums really need that a lot, but they're also going to have to step up and say, you know, we won't accept certain people's money, just as they had basically done with the Sacklers a few years ago.
Karina Huber, CGTN, New York.
He was one of Spain's greatest artists, and now, 200 years after his death, Francisco Goya's work is finding a new audience, all thanks to digital technology at a museum in Madrid. Rahul Pathak reports.
Goya has gone digital. Take the works of one of Spain's greatest artists, combined with cutting-edge technology. The result? A truly unique artistic experience. The In Goya exhibition at Madrid's Fernán Gómez Centro Cultural includes more than 1,000 images taken from the paintings of Francisco Goya. The images, some of which have come from private collections, are projected onto 35 different screens, allowing visitors to get closer than ever before to the works of the Aragon-born artist.
I call this an experience. There are no paintings, just projections. What makes this unique is the actual scale. You can enjoy paintings that are 90 centimetres high on a 6-metre tall screen. That's what makes it a fully immersive experience. You experience it on such a large scale that you get inside the art.
Now, Goya's immersive exhibition is the perfect compromise for the digital age. Now, museum goers tend to be middle-aged, but this new format, curated in a space with no windows, allows everyone to enjoy the old master in a fresh and modern way.
We like the format, and we've never been to anything like this before. It's a really good way for young people to experience art.
I really like the visual impact, the music and the projections, for sure.
The exhibition has already been a huge hit around the country and is set to be shown abroad next year. Goya was famous for using the latest technology in his lithographs back in the 1800s. 2 centuries on, Goya fans believe the Spaniard would approve of this digital recreation from his finest works. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
And finally, Christmas has come early for a few Londoners. Keepers at London Zoo presented these gorillas with a gift-wrapped selection of vegetables, while the lions had to make do with what the zoo says were brightly wrapped boxes scented with seasonal spices. Not sure which of those presents would go down worse with most kids. They don't seem terribly pleased. Anyway, Merry Christmas to them.
That would not go down well in my house.
No,
yours?
Absolutely, no.
The headlines again. A bailout for hospitality in the UK as the Omicron variant triggers a Christmas business collapse. But many in the industry say it's not enough.
Germany considers closing nightclubs and bars after scientists warn the variant could bring services there to breaking point. The World Health Organization has warned Europe to brace for a significant surge in cases.
And President Putin says he'll deploy the Russian military to counter NATO threats. But Ukraine says its future lies in alliance to the West.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
There's more on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.